Welcome back, Fadhel. Good to have you here again.
Thank you.
There was another thing I was thinking about, and it's this, because usually mainstream economists, they say that we need to have some kind of unemployment. And how can you have a prosperous community if you have people who are unemployed? I mean, there will be lots of cost for society connected to that, and on the individual too. And I know you've been talking lots about full employment, and with full employment, I actually mean there is a job for everybody, a decent wage for everybody. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at outside the economics profession and the social sciences and even medical studies, the issue of unemployment, when you look at any country, the US, UK, Europe, developing countries, every time we have high levels of unemployment, it's typically associated with much higher social costs associated with depression, anxiety, suicide, domestic violence, child abuse, crime, and prison costs, and all of those social costs increase automatically every time you have mass unemployment. Now, when we end recessions and economies recover, all of those social costs decline and quality of life as a result improves. So the cost of unemployment is extremely painful for all societies. Now, that doesn't mean if we produce full employment, we will never have crime, we will never have domestic violence or abuse, of course, but the thing is that we reduce those factors substantially. So that's point number one. So the benefits to society are unbelievable. The benefits to the private sector, when you have a full employment society with everyone working with a decent wage and benefits, it means that their spending in the private sector will be guaranteed, essentially. Because in many cases, when we don't have a full employment guarantee or a job guarantee, we rely on our expectations. Do I expect my job to be safe in the next few months? And if I feel like I may be losing my job because my neighbors are losing their jobs because there is a recession, there's a stock market crash or whatever it is, then I'm going to feel more anxious. So my spending will be done accordingly. So am I going to go and buy a new house, buy a new car, sign up my kids for summer camp? I'm going to be much more conservative with my spending. And that means fewer sales in the private sector, fewer revenues, fewer jobs in the private sector, fewer profits. And that in and of itself continues the vicious cycle of a recession and sometimes accelerates a recession. But if we know that if we have a job guarantee whereby the federal government guarantees to anybody who's ready, willing, and able to work a job, a useful, productive activity in the community in a job guarantee program that is consistent with their geographic location, with their skills, with their aspirations, then I know even though I may lose my slightly higher paying job in the private sector, I will still have a minimum standard of living, a job guarantee that allows me to continue to spend at a decent rate. So that's the benefit to the private sector. Even more important to the private sector is actually the preparedness, the readiness, and the productivity of workers in the economy. Because what we know from lots and lots of studies is that unemployment, especially long-term unemployment, leads to deterioration of skills at all levels, not just kind of soft skills and social skills, but technical, professional skills deteriorate over time. So when an employer is looking to hire a new employee, and you ask them, and we have surveys actually asking employers, who would you rather hire? Somebody who's currently working for a competitor, that's choice number one, somebody who's unemployed and maybe has been unemployed for more than 6 months, versus a new college graduate who doesn't have any experience, versus somebody who's been unemployed for 6 months but has been volunteering in the community and really active and engaged in a volunteer capacity. You give them all these choices, and the top choice is somebody who's already working, because I don't have to worry about their skills. They're already in the game. The second choice would be somebody who has experience, lost job in the last 6 months, but has been very active and engaged in a volunteer capacity. because they maintain their professional skills in some fashion, followed by a new college graduate with no work experience, life experience, because we can train them and get them ready quickly. They have their kind of academic rigor standards, so to speak. The last person they want to hire is somebody who's been unemployed long-term, because they know the cost and the deterioration and the additional problems that are associated with long-term unemployment. So the benefits of having a job guarantee is we eliminate that cost to individuals, families, communities, but also to the private sector. Because the turnover cost of training and retraining every business cycle and losing workers is massive, right? So the current model that we have is that we tell individual workers when they lose their job, essentially you're on your own. Go either find another job or find a training opportunity, pay for it out of pocket, or go back to school and learn the new skills that are needed for the next 5 to 10 years worth of professional experience, and again, pay for it out of pocket. So we're allowing the market to decide who's ready for the next sets of jobs and who's not, when we should actually be planning strategically for the transformation of the economy. Because this is the other less well-known aspect of the job guarantee, that is, if we allow, if we look at the transformation of technology, the transformation of markets, this is the one constant factor that we've had since the Industrial Revolution. There's always going to be technological change that will displace workers and make some skills obsolete in the labor market. And the only way to mitigate for that is to prepare workers for the next sets of skills, which are always higher skills that require more technical and vocational and training background. And the problem is that these changes don't happen once every 30 years. They're not timed with your retirement. They're typically timed in the middle of your career. There'll be a substantial change in your profession. And that's why a lot of people go through a mid-career crisis, which in some cases leads to unemployment and socioeconomic exclusion. If we know these are constant factors that happen systematically, every 5 to 10 to 15 years, there's major technological changes in all kinds of industries that transform, and as a result, make certain workers redundant in the workplace, then we have to have a strategy, a national strategy, not a case-by-case, company-by-company strategy, a national strategy that says, how do we as a society make sure that we're not left behind in technological change, but we actually lead and anticipate these technological changes without neglecting people, without neglecting industries, without neglecting anybody. As a matter of fact, using our skills and our labor force as a factor of strength to move ahead with the technological changes. And that means the state has to act as the entity that underwrites the cost of that transition, and with the least amount of damage to the private sector or to workers or to communities. And the job guarantee is a key factor, because the job guarantee allows an immediate transition into employment without losing professional skills, and can be used, the job guarantee with paid work can be used as an on-the-job training program to transition workers into the next generation of technological requirements and professional requirements that are needed for the private sector to thrive for the next 10 to 15 years. And doing that systematically, not by accident, not as patchwork that some municipalities do it, some nonprofit organization that has the right intentions does a little bit of training for some workers. No, this needs to be a systematic approach that the private sector recognizes and embraces, that labor unions recognize and embrace, that local and state and federal governments recognize and coordinate the transition for all workers, so that nobody's left behind, so that we're automatically transitioning and eliminating all the costs in terms of lost productivity, lost income, and all the additional social costs that I mentioned earlier. So the job guarantee is a net benefit to the private sector in addition to being a net benefit to the individuals, families, and society. If you look at the wasted opportunities with mass unemployment that we've had, especially when the unemployed are youth, in the prime years of their contribution to society, we exclude them from the labor market, from economic activity, and we slow down their contribution to society until the economy recovers, until opportunities are provided. In addition to the neglect of the more senior workers who are close to retirement but not close enough to retire. Many people struggle during those last few years because it's kind of too late for them to start a new career. There's no automatic mechanism to help them transition to a new job or a new professional development situation, unless they happen to be lucky to be in a company that has an internal program to transition them, or a local municipality that has a program that does that. But for the majority of workers, you're on your own, and that could be very painful for those individuals and their families.
So let me try to make a short conclusion then, if I understood you right. But what you're saying is this enhanced productivity, it makes the economy much more stable, because you're going to have income to people while they are keeping up their skills. And if you have income to people, you're going to have sales for businesses, which means that they take away quite a lot of uncertainty in their business. And then you're going to have tax revenue for the local communities, because people are actually working and they don't have to pay anything for people who are not working. So it's a win-win all over there. So what is the resistance for this? If it sounds like it's like a win-win-win all over the place. Or did I miss something?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where the MMT, or modern monetary theory framework, becomes important in explaining who's going to pay for the job guarantee and the job training and all the benefits that the workers will receive. Well, we're talking about the federal government paying for it, the national government. We're told that, larger government deficits will cause inflation, will cause higher interest rates, will crowd out the private sector. That's where MMT comes in and kind of removes the myth of the deficit and its negative consequences. There's also the fear that the government intervention here will be impeding on the free enterprise and on the free market. And usually people who make these remarks don't really know what the pillars of the free markets are, let alone communism or socialism. So the pillars of the free market, and this is not me, this is Milton Friedman, this is the kind of the neoclassical Austrian school of thought. The free market is about private property, free and fair competition, freedom of choice, private property, competition, freedom of choice, and self-interest, right? These are the four pillars of the market. The job guarantee program doesn't impede on any of this. Your private property is still your private property. Your self-interest is there for everybody to pursue. It doesn't impede on it. The freedom of choice, if anything, we're increasing choices for firms. Now they can choose in a larger pool of productive, competitive, ready to work, ready to hire workers. And competition, this enhances competition in the labor market, competition for workers, for firms. So if anything, it enhances the pillars of the capitalist system, but it just adds this last push to make sure that everybody's included in this capitalist competitive market and that nobody's neglected. The market doesn't have an automatic mechanism to do that. The market, by design, always leaves a certain portion of the population, usually the individuals who are what we call the first to be fired when we enter a recession and the last to be hired when the economy improves. There's a subgroup of the population, tends to be women, minorities, people with disabilities, people who spent time in prison, we call returning citizens. These are the individuals that are constantly neglected and trapped into a poverty trap, structural poverty trap. The job guarantee program guarantees that nobody's left behind. by design. And that's why the job guarantee includes education and training, professional training, vocational training, educational training, to make sure that everybody is rising in terms of the level of skills and preparedness and productivity. And that's a net benefit to society. Now you have a larger pool of productive, competitive workers to choose from.
Thanks. I think that was a great ending. And for the next part, I think the question that most people, at least me, have is, you're talking about the federal government financing this. So maybe in the next part, we could talk a bit more about financing all this from the federal government. So thanks for this time.
Absolutely.